Hello and welcome back to another story time with She. This week's story is the continuation of Balin and Balan. Let's get straight to it. We left off last week with Balin and Balan being faced by a strange figure who they declared their enemy. "You are Balin," the man said quietly, "and this is your brother Balan. You go to meet the King Renaissance and you will not get very far unless you heed my advice." "Merlin," whispered Balan, and he bowed deeply. "We will be ruled by your words." "Follow me," said Merlin, "and you shall accomplish a brave deed." Merlin told them where they could ambush King Renaissance. They surprised him in the forest and fought fiercely with his men, captured him and set out with the prisoner to find King Arthur. They came upon Arthur in the thick of a terrible battle, fighting against 12 rebel kings. All that day his enemies had held the field, and Arthur felt sure that his men would be defeated, until a pair of knights came flying out of the forest. They rushed into the fray from behind, and fought so fiercely that Arthur's foes thought an entire new army had appeared. Soon the rebel kings had all fled. "Who are those brave knights?" Arthur asked Merlin when the battle was over. "Balin and Balan, the bravest of knights," he replied. "They have brought you King Renaissance as a prisoner, but their tale shall be the saddest of any, for they shall both die on the same day." Arthur had no time to dwell on their sad fate, for he had more battles to fight. Next he rode north to put Saxon invaders into flight. One day he saw a knight riding by with a look of terror on his face. A little while later, King Arthur saw Balin riding past, although he looked so pale and gaunt that Arthur didn't recognise him at first. "Balin, I have reason to be grateful to you. Please stay a while." "Sire, I must not stay. There is a curse upon me, and wherever I go I bring evil," Balin replied. "But please, tell me if there is any way that I can serve my kingdom." "A man rode past here in some distress. Bring him to me, so I may help him," Arthur said. "I am at your command," Balin replied. He bowed deeply and rode off in search of the stranger. When he reached him in the deep forest, the stranger turned to him with wild eyes. "Get away from me! Do not stop me! I must flee!" he cried. "There is a black enchantment following me. I must ride on." There was a whirl of wings as a bird took off from the undergrowth, and the stranger looked around, startled. "You have my protection," Balin assured him. "Come with me. King Arthur has asked for you. He will help you." "He cannot protect me. No one can," said the stranger. "I will protect you with my life," said Balin. So the stranger, who was called Sir Horalus, rode back with Balin to Arthur. "King Arthur, this man—" Balin began, but he stopped short, as out of nowhere a spear came hurtling through the air and pierced Sir Horalus' chest. The knight fell from his horse, and Balin rushed to him. "That was a false knight, Balin," the dying man gasped. "By magic he rides invisible. It was just as I feared. Please, take my horse. I beg you, avenge my death." Then clutching at Balin's sleeve he died. Balin vowed to take on his revenge at the Garlon, and sped off straight away in search of him. On his journey he heard many more stories of innocent people Garlon had slain, but he could not find where he had gone, until finally a stranger told him that Garlon was staying with King Pelles at the enchanted castle of Gormbok, where a great feast was going to be held the next day. Balin galloped through the night. In the morning he arrived at the gates of a castle, where he was made welcome. Servants brought him fine clothes and showed him where he could rest before the feast. That evening, as he entered the banqueting hall, a serving man took his sword, for no man was allowed to go inside armed. but Balin had a small silver dagger clasped in his hand and hidden in the folds of his cloak. "Which knight is Balin?" he asked one of the other guests. "He's over here," the guest replied. "He is the most marvellous man alive." The man chuckled. "He can ride invisible and slay whoever he likes." "If I kill him here at the feast, with all these knights present," Balin thought, "I may not escape alive, but if I leave him living, there's no knowing what harm he may do." "Hey, you there!" Balin snarled at him. "What are you looking at? Eat your meat and get on with what you came here to do." Balin walked up to him slowly and deliberately. "What I came here to do? This is what I came here to do." Balin drew his dagger and plunged it into Garlon's heart. The hall exploded into chaos. "Why have you killed my honoured guest, Garlon?" cried King Pels. "You shall not leave this castle alive." "Kill me if you dare," Balin shouted back. "Garlon was my knight, and I shall avenge him," roared King Pels. He grabbed a great sword from the wall and swiped at Balin with a stroke so hard that Balin's dagger shattered into 1,000 pieces. Balin fled with King Pels hot on his heels. He ran along the stone corridors and dark passages until he came to a flight of winding stairs that led up into a tower. They were covered in cobwebs and dust. Nobody had set foot there in 100 years. Balin raced up the stairs, stopping at the top to catch his breath. He found himself in front of a closed door, and was suddenly filled with fear at what could lie behind it. King Pell's footsteps were crashing up the stairs behind him. Steeling himself, he burst through the door. As he did so, he heard a voice roaring, "Enter not, for you are not worthy." Terrified, Balin shut his eyes, but when he opened them again, there was no one there. On the far side of the room there was a table. On the table was a cup covered with a silver cloth, and although the rest of the room was thick with dust, the table and the cloth were shining. The cup glowed so brightly he could hardly bear to look at it. Balin began to tremble. He didn't know why, but he wished to kneel before the table and pray, and never take up a sword again. He turned to see King Pels looming in the doorway. Balin grabbed a spear that was hanging on the wall, just as the king dropped his own dagger. As if by magic, all the rage seemed to fall from the king's face. He stood in the doorway, smiling at Balin like a child. But Balin was taking no chances. He rushed at King Pels with a spear and struck him in the side. King Pels cried out and tumbled backwards down the stairs. The castle reeled. Darkness engulfed Balin. A great wind whirled around him. He was falling through endless darkness, and all he could hear were the terrible cries of pain echoing in the distance. 3 days Balin laid at the ruins of the castle. It was Merlin who dragged him out, his hair and clothes covered in dust. Merlin held a flask to his lips, and Balin gulped the water thirstily. "The guest at the feast," he began. "All dead, and many others with them," Merlin replied. "Look as far as you can see, and what is before you?" "Ruins," said Balin. "Wasted lands." "All because of one stroke. The spear you used was sacred. The cup you saw was the Holy Grail. Our Lord Jesus drank from it last supper. King Pels will suffer from the wound for many years before he is healed." Then Merlin helped the feeble Balin onto his horse. "Ride on now, Balin," he said grimly. "Your destiny is waiting for you, as mine is for me." So Balin rode through the wastelands, past the ruined buildings and the parched field. Everywhere he went, people stared at him with empty eyes. Finally he came to the castle, where he was greeted by hundreds of maidens and hundreds of knights. The lady of the castle came forward. "Sir Knight, you are welcome at my castle," she said. "Here you may rest after all your sorrows." For the first time in many months Balin almost smiled. "But first you must fight with the Black Knight of the Riviera," the lady said. "All those who enter the castle must pass him." "I do not wish to fight," said Balin. "It is but one battle," the lady said, smiling gently at him. "Then you may rest." So Balin gritted his teeth and rode to the river, where the most fearsome stranger was waiting for him. He was dressed in black from head to foot and wore a visor which covered his face. In silence they set their lances. Then they rode so hard at each other that both lances were shattered and each was thrown from their horse. The two knights lay on the ground for some minutes before they both struggled to their feet. First Balin struck the Black Knight, but the knight struck back with a colossal blow that shattered Balin's shield. They swiped at each other again and again until blood flowed from them like water. At last the Black Knight sank to the ground. "Tell me your name," Balin said, "for I have known no one else so strong except my brother." "My name is Balan," the Black Knight said. "I am brother to the good knight Balin." At this, Balin fainted to the ground. With the last of his strength, Balan crawled over to him. He unlaced his helmet and gently pulled it off. When he saw his brother's face, he wept. Balin opened his eyes, looking up at his brother. Tears rolled down his own cheeks. "Brother, what have I done?" Balin whispered. "I would have known you, if only you'd worn your shield." Then clasping at each other's hands, the two brothers lay down side by side and died. They were buried beside the castle in the same tomb, and their sad tale was told throughout the land. And that is the end to the story of Balin and Balan. Thank you for listening to another story time with She, and as for next week, join us for the